say, all right, well, I wanted to know what calls were made last month, so let's just keep this very simple. Let's put everything up into the top. So what I'm going to do is not what the tendency of the average person to do is. Usually people say, well, I want to know last month, so I'll pull all the months in, and I want to know what's the types that were done, and pull in the result code. Or I actually type is all call because that's the only one I selected. So result codes, what are the activity codes, and year 2009. So I'll drag this down, and then I'll choose 2009 in here. And you can see that what I'm doing is sort of imitating the way I see people do it on support calls and so on. Because the assumption is always, well, I have to drag all my fields in here so that I can do my selections, right? Well, of course not. My number one trick that I always say is leave things in the page area and do your filtering up at the top before anything else. Leave that stuff up there. You know that it's 2009 not because it says 2009 down here. I mean, you do know that it's 2009 when you see it down here, but it's simpler to have that right at the top of the screen where it acts more as a header for the overall report. And you don't really need result code, and you don't really need activity code unless you want to include it. But what you were interested in was who was doing the calls. In this case, different user IDs, right? Now, in your database, you probably have, you can have 10, 15, 20 users. And so all those users would show up here. And what would happen when you've got it broken out by month and user both is typically it would just stretch off the page down to the bottom. And I very strongly believe that the best way to present goldmine data is, if possible, keep all the information on the main screen. The main tricks for doing that are, I think, keep it, if possible, to either what I would call sort of a quasi-line listing report, which I'll get to here in a moment, or do your report as a one-by-one matrix. For my activity type here, I'm actually going to choose call, even though calls is the only kind of information that's in here. This gives us a nice, concise, in a single view, overview of the entire database. This is all of our users side by side, and you could get probably at least 20 users on the screen all next to each other. And then there's only 12 months in the year, so it would only go down to 12 here. So on your screen, you can get a nice, concise view here. And at the same time, answering the specific question you had, which was how many calls did my sales reps make? Let's assume all these are sales reps in the previous month. Well, here's the previous month as far as this demo database is concerned. That line gives it to you, or if I wanted to be more specific about it, of course, I could just specify that previous month and break those down in some way that's also useful. But again, staying with a one-by-one matrix. One-by-one is nice partly because it's just easier for people to understand. As soon as I bring in a second line here, people start needing an explanation that, okay, these are ones where the result code is COM, but the activity code is broken out for each of the different ones that are COM. So this two calls that Bill made where the activity code was SL and the result code was COM, et cetera. So you have to kind of go into an explanation, where this requires no explanation at all. Anybody who's seen a table knows what they're looking at and doesn't need to bother with subtotals, let's say. For a lot of people, they leave the default being where the subtotals are turned on here. So I'm going to go and turn those on to sort of illustrate this. So, here you can also see what the calls were that were made by each of our different sales reps in the month of April, and here's the numbers. But they've got all this other stuff that's sort of extraneous to the main point, just kind of complicating things. So, again, keep it simple. The other thing that goes with that is, if this is simple, you can very easily go straight from the numeric presentation to a graph presentation, and there's no confusion.